time in Rolex history where everything was not 100% to spec every time. And we are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be chatting about the Rolex watch. Yes, sorry for those that are not into Rolex, but Rolex is just synonymous with watches. We're going to be talking about the Rolex watch, or Rolex sports watch, that is going to be the next one to crack and explode in value. And also, it is a watch that is so often overlooked. It really needs a little bit of attention and light, and you just need to know about it. But first, I'd like to thank you for liking and subscribing. Oh, by the way, it's vintage. So for those of you that came here originally for vintage, yes, we're talking about a watch that's vintage now. So one for you guys as well. But also, if you've been here a while and you haven't liked and subscribe, please do that. Thumbs up on the video, hit the notification box. Also, just if you're new to this channel, what we do is we talk about watches, vintage watches, and everything that comes with it. So stick around, because I do put in work here for you to give you this content and also show you things about what we do at delraywatch.com, where we sell pre-owned watches and service and help you out in many other ways. So check out delraywatch.com. So here's the thing, guys. The Rolex 16550. This is the original Rolex Explorer 2 model that is first to be considered transitional, and also the first model that started kind of the lineage of the Rolex Explorer 2 model into what you see today with the larger formats. Now, what we have is the 16550 once again, and this is now a vintage watch, and it's overlooked all the time. People forget about this reference. You know, even watch dealers, you know, the most discerning of watch collectors, they overlook the 16550. You have the 1655 and you have the 16570, and right in between you have the 16550. I know, a lot of numbers, and it's overlooked all the time because people just don't see the minute differences in this watch compared to the one that came after, the 70, but they do see so many differences to the one before, and I'll admit there is a tiny premium on this reference. But because of a few things we're going to talk about, not only has the watch become incredibly scarce, but also the numbers are really starting to climb on these because of the scarcity. This example that I have right here, I actually purchased for myself just a few days ago, because once again, the things we talk about here and on delraywatch.com truly are the things that we believe in, the watches we believe in. So, you know, if you think I'm being a little too pitchy here, because full disclosure, we do have one for sale at delraywatch.com, but we have 100 watches. You know, you don't have to buy this watch. You know, I personally purchased this watch for myself along with the 16800 that I had purchased way back when, because I do believe in it. So let's go right into it. The 16550 was only produced between 1985 to 1989. Now, it's towards the shorter half of that 89 and towards the upper half of that 1985. And so, you know, within a little bit less than a 4-year span, this watch was produced in limited quantities. There's no official production count because, you know, Rolex does not really disclose that, of course. They're privately owned at the time, and they still are. And so there are not a lot of these 16550s floating around. Another reason is when these were released, you had the Rolex GMT Master, which was really taking off, the GMT Master, and you had a lot of the same functions, right? I mean, this has a time zone hand. It doesn't have the rotating bezel, and that's why a lot of people just gravitated toward the GMT Master, even though it was a little bit more expensive. The Rolex GMT Master, it was a very popular watch compared to this watch, which honestly was, ironically enough, considered to be entry level for the time. The bezel didn't rotate. The case shape was not quite as hefty as the GMT Master, though. I mean, the differences are so minute. But all in all, this watch really was supposed to be a little bit less sophisticated and high-end compared to the GMT Master. And when you talk about a watch like this, the 16550, after that 4-year period, Rolex eventually came out with that 16570, and that's the one that everyone talks about, right? So in the 16570, the case was thinner, which is a huge deal, right? This is a thicker Rolex Explorer 2. I have a 6.5-inch wrist, and it feels and it wears bigger than the 570 on the wrist. So it's a little bit chunkier, which is interesting because usually the older Rolexes, the older you go, you get a little bit thinner. But it's not the case with this, and it is because of the older movement. So this model featured the same movement as the GMT Master 16760, which is the famous caliber 3085 by Rolex. So it's a thicker movement, and because of the case size and dimensions, that's how we get to that, to that whole styling characteristic about it. So with this 16550, you have a couple of options, right? First of all, this is not an option, it's more of a feature. The bezel on this, and I'll have a picture here, but the bezel has thicker print than the 570. So not only is the case thicker, the bezel font is thicker, which really gives it that awesome vintage feel. And of course, you have the tritium lume. So on this specific example, by the way, this 16550 came in a white dial and a black dial. I'll talk about the differences between them, but the lume on these things, the tritium lume, if you get the tritium ones, which is the original dial with the white gold surrounds, they're starting to age and just look amazing. Pumpkin color lume, vintage goodness. That is excellent about that. And the lume can definitely jump up the price on these watches, no problem. So let's talk about some of the features and nuances and intricacies of not only the 16550, but some of these also roll into the 16570. The thing with these watches, guys, is that because it was a little bit less produced than all the other sports models of the time, and because it was less popular and it was considered a little more entry and it was not a mainstream staple lineup from the Rolex brand, there's a little bit of gray area when it comes to determining exactly how these things ship from the factory. There's some dial differences, there's some things, for example, the early examples of these had the white gold surrounds on the 16550, but there's some cases where original owners claim that the surrounding metal is actually black on their dial, which is known to be a sure thing in the 16570, but there's also some known good confirmed cases of the dial having the black surrounds on a white dial a 16550, which is it's hard to kind of conceptualize and grasp with all the numbers, but what I'm basically trying to say is because of what this watch was at the time, not now, of course, these are rare collectible watches, there's just a lot of varying degrees and differences between these watches and what's known to be good shipped from Rolex and not. So it's something to consider when shopping for these, and also once again trust the dealer. So basically you have the black dial and the white dial. Now the white dial 16550, these things, and there'll be a picture here, the white dial has turned to this beautiful custard cream on the original dial with the white gold surround. So the stainless steel looking, for those of you that are not familiar, but it is white gold. And the hands are white gold as well. And the dials have aged. Rolex messed up the white dials for the 550, and they turn eventually into like a custard cream dial. And these things are gorgeous because Rolex does not produce cream dial sports watch, let alone they never intended to in the first place. So these are incredibly rare, and you'll pay 20 grand plus, just depending on the provenance, the condition, things like that. You might be able to get one a little bit less, especially if it has not turned cream or custard yet, and we do have one available at delraywatch.com, I believe. Or is it the one with the black hands? I don't know. Check it out, delraywatch.com. We just got it in, and Fed handles that one, but we do have it, full disclosure. So that's the white dial. The white dials have become incredibly rare and desirable because of that custard change. Now you have the black dial, which I have here as well, and there are some nuances with these black dials. These black dials, along with other traditional references like the 16800 and I think one of the GMT Masters, Rolex in this transitional period, late 80s, later mid to late 80s, they did not have the black dials worked out. So what they were, what these dials sometimes do is they turn into a spider dial with a crackle. The actual dial will crack over time when exposed to different elements like the sun, and also a sponge dial, which I coined the term a while back with the 16800. The black will start turning matte and create this sponging effect, and that's increasingly desirable as time goes on, and the whole vintage watch community is really developing itself and exploding. For me, this is actually a pristine dial on this example that I've purchased for myself. There's no cracking, there's no damage. The patina, the lume plops, pips rather, are just gorgeous and perfectly aging. So there's no special considerations with any cracking or that. So it all depends what you're looking for. Also, with these dials, there's a very specific thing that goes on with the writing on the dials, and there's chronometer and certified. So superlative, chronometer, and officially certified. It's on the bottom of sports models. Now, the words chronometer and certified are typically off-center. You know, the chronometer, the C in chronometer is a little bit to the left, and certified's a little bit to the right below each other. And if those two C's match up, we call that, in the vintage world, rail dial. It's called the rail dial because the C's go up and down. I guess it looks like a rail. It's just something catchy some guy behind a booth came up with some time ago. But it is something interesting that happened on the printing of these dials that remind us of a time in Rolex history where everything was not 100% to spec every time. And subtleties like that fetch premiums. So if you get a white dial that's turned into a cream with a rail, forget about it. I mean, we're talking 20K, 30K plus, and collectors, they want that. You know, if it's the next watch to crack, and we see it. And we see it just at Delray Watch. You know, we've been in business Delray Watch a little under 2 years now. And when we first started Delray Watch, some of the first watches we had were the Explorer 2s, just because they really were more approachable in the Rolex lineup for a newer business. So we had some of them. And, you know, a 16570, which is commonplace, great watch, but you can get them all the time. We were selling one of those full box and papers, I think $4,000. Now full box and papers of 70. If you can find one in that kind of condition, you know, $7,000 plus. If it's a naked, like we also have a 70 at Delray Watch, you'll pay around $5,000. And when you start getting into the pricing for the 16550, like this one here, they start at between like $6,300, $6,400, depending on the condition, the color of the dial, all of that, because once again, it's a vintage watch now, and there are subtleties. So you can pay anywhere between, let's see on my list here, anywhere between, like I said, $6,000 to $20,000 plus, just depending on the mix of little intricacies and nuances in your specific version of the watch. Now, one last thing while I'm looking at it, the bracelets on these, apparently you could have gotten two different bracelets when you purchased this from the AD. The AD was willing to put a Submariner style bracelet with the fold lock clasp, I guess, on some of the 550s and 570s. Once again, back to that gray area of a time in Rolex history where dealers could do interesting things like that. Now forget about it, but it's certainly a place and time that reminds us of that. And watches that have those differences where dealers could swap things, or little manufacturing differences like the rail dial, like the lume, like the bracelet, all of that stuff. The bezel, by the way, the fatter bezel, that's what makes a vintage watch valuable in a watch valuable a lot of times. Pair that with the Rolex name. I don't see a better watch, honestly, because I bought this for myself. I don't see a better watch that you can pick up now in that transitional to vintage period that has as much room for play in the foreseeable near future, the next 3 to 5, even closer to 3. I don't see a whole lot of other models out there that have as much room to grow as this. When you start comparing this watch to like a Pepsi from the same era, to some of the subs from the same era, depending, like a 5513, I mean, some of those have really doubled in the last few years, and this one has not quite doubled, maybe gone up 20 to 25%. So I see another 25%, if not more, also keeping up with the other models and the trend line on that. So my top pick right now is the 16550. The 16570 I see going up later as more people start dumping in these dumping these into their collection. So it just depends where you're at in terms of price point and budget, but definitely one to consider. I certainly have myself. If you don't agree, leave in the comments below. I want to hear your opinion. And once again, full disclosure, we do have some of these available, but this is my personal watch that will be in my collection for a very long time. Anyway, guys, what do you think about this? Leave in the comments below. Are you on the bandwagon for this? Do you disagree with me? Do you think it's, it's not quite there with the subs? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you like this video. If you didn't like this video, I'm sorry, but please like and subscribe anyway, because next time, maybe you will. Anyway, guys, have a great weekend. Today's Friday, and I've got a bunch of things left to do. Thanks for watching. You have been Chatting with John P. Ciao.